Hey, welcome to The Explainer. We're about to dive into one of the most famous books on the planet, Genesis. But here's the thing. Right at the very beginning, on page 1, there's a fascinating puzzle. I mean, it's a real head-scratcher that's had people talking for centuries. So let's just get right into it.
Okay, so get this. Did you know that the book of Genesis doesn't just have one creation story? It actually kicks off with two of them, and they're placed right back to back in chapters 1 and 2. And we're not talking about slight differences here. No way. They have totally different details, a completely different vibe, and, well, the order of creation is completely flipped on its head.
Just look at this. It's probably the most obvious contradiction. In the first story, Genesis 1, the timeline goes plants, then animals, and then boom, man and woman are created together at the very end. But then you turn the page to Genesis 2 and the whole script gets flipped. First, you get the man, then come the plants, then the animals, and finally, the woman is created from the man. So, which one is it? What's going on here? That's exactly the puzzle we're going to unpack today.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we'll look at the cosmic blueprint of Genesis 1. Then, we'll zoom in on the divine potter in Genesis 2. After that, we'll get into the big reveal, solving the puzzle with the four sources theory. We'll also touch on some echoes of ancient myths. And finally, we'll see how these two different visions create one amazing story. Let's go.
Okay, first up, the cosmic blueprint. This is the story you find in Genesis, chapter 1, and you have to imagine this one in widescreen. It's creation on an absolutely epic cosmic scale. You know, it's super grand, very structured, it's almost got this poetic rhythm to it.
So in this first story, the name used for the creator is Elohim. Now that's the generic Hebrew word for God or divinity, and it immediately paints this picture of a deity who is totally transcendent, powerful, and kind of distant. Think less of a person you could have a conversation with and more of a vast cosmic force that brings order to everything.
Yeah, this first story is all about structure and order. You've got this very neat 6-day timeline where everything just falls into place. And creation itself, it's totally effortless. It happens just by speaking. And God said, and poof, it's done. The focus here is on the whole shebang. Light, sky, seas, the whole cosmos. And humanity? We're the grand finale, the final act. So the big takeaway is a God of immense power and majestic order.
All right, now let's talk about the divine potter in Genesis 2, and this is where things get really interesting. It's like that huge cosmic IMAX camera we were just watching suddenly zooms all the way in for a super intimate close-up. The tone, the language, even what God is called, everything just changes on a dime. So in this story, the creator is called Yahweh Elohim, which gets translated as the Lord God. And this is huge. Yahweh isn't just a title, it's God's personal name. Using it is like going from calling someone Mr. Smith to calling them John. It signals a massive shift from that distant cosmic force to a personal God who's about to roll up his sleeves and get involved. And this is where we see something called anthropomorphism, basically giving God human-like qualities. Instead of just speaking things into existence, this God literally gets his hands dirty. The text says he formed the first man from dust, just like a potter working with clay. He breathes life right into his nostrils. Then he plants this incredible garden, Eden, and puts that infamous tree of knowledge of good and evil right in the middle. It's a completely different picture, so much more personal, so much more hands-on.
You know, the creation of woman here is a perfect example of this story's style. It plays out like a little drama, right? First, God looks at the man, Adam, and says, you know what? It's not good for him to be alone. So what's the solution? A parade of animals. Adam names them all, but nope, no suitable partner there. So then comes the, let's call it divine surgery. God puts the man into a deep sleep, takes one of his ribs, and then builds a woman from it. It's this beautiful, intimate story about our fundamental need for connection.
Okay, so we've got two wildly different stories. One is this huge cosmic epic. The other is a super personal, down-to-earth tale. So how on earth did they both end up right at the beginning of the Bible? Well, to figure that out, we need to look at a brilliant scholarly theory that really cracked this whole thing wide open.
That theory is called the documentary hypothesis, and here's the basic idea. The first 5 books of the Bible, what if they weren't written by just one person? What if they're actually a combination of at least 4 different sources from totally different time periods? Imagine a master editor taking these different threads, each with its own unique style and perspective, and weaving them together into one seamless story. It's like a beautiful, complex quilt made from different fabrics.
So, our 2 creation stories? They come from 2 of these exact sources. The big, grand one in Genesis 1, That's from the priestly source, or P for short, written much later, around the 6th century BC. But that personal, hands-on story in Genesis 2, that comes from the Yahwist Source, or J, and it's way older. We're talking maybe the 10th century BC. And you can see on this chart just how different they are. We're talking different centuries, different names for God, and totally different portrayals of the Creator.
But wait, there's another layer to this. These stories weren't just written by different authors within ancient Israel. They were also part of a much, much bigger conversation, one that was happening all across the ancient world.
Right. You have to remember, ancient Israel was not on some deserted island. It was smack in the middle of the ancient Near East, surrounded by massive empires like Babylon and Egypt. And all of these cultures had their own powerful creation myths. The biblical writers knew these stories. They were totally immersed in this cultural conversation, sometimes borrowing themes and sometimes pushing back against them with their own unique ideas.
And when you start digging into the myths of their neighbors, you see some really familiar ideas pop up. I mean, creating humanity from clay? The Mesopotamian epic Atrahasis has that. A divine garden paradise for the first people? Yep, that was a common motif. A forbidden tree that gives you special knowledge? A talking serpent figure? Check and check. These weren't just random ideas. They were the building blocks of storytelling in the ancient world.
But here's the crucial part. This is the real game changer. While some of the ingredients might look familiar, the final recipe in Genesis is absolutely revolutionary. Take the Babylonian creation story, the Enuma Elish. In that one, the world is created out of a super violent war between gods, and humans are basically made from the blood of a losing god just to be slaves. Genesis just blows that idea out of the water. It presents a radical alternative. One all-powerful God who creates a good world on purpose and makes humanity in his own image, not as slaves but as caretakers and partners. That is a profoundly different worldview.
So all of this brings us back to the big question. Why keep both? If they're from different sources and they seem to contradict each other, why on earth would the final editors put them right next to each other at the very beginning?
Well, the genius of it is this. They aren't just contradictory, they're complementary. They work together to paint a much richer, fuller picture of God than either one could on its own. Genesis 1, the priestly source, gives us the awe-inspiring, transcendent creator of the entire cosmos, a God of majestic order. But then Genesis 2, the Yahwist source, gives us the up-close, personal, relational God who walks in a garden and shapes humanity with his own hands. You see, you need both. You need the cosmic and the personal, the powerful and the intimate. One God, two essential visions.
So in the end, what we have isn't a simple, flat story with a few mistakes. It's a rich, sophisticated, and deliberately layered masterpiece. Knowing that it's woven together from these different voices and that it's in a conversation with its ancient world, well, that doesn't diminish it. If anything, it makes it even more incredible, revealing a text with so much depth. And that's really the final thought I want to leave you with. How does understanding all these layers, all these different voices, change the way you read this foundational story today?